You ask who or how was the fourth way made clear to me? When I discovered the writings of Gurdjieff, the writings about the work through In Search of the Miraculous by Ouspensky, through Beelzebub's Tales to His Grandson by Gurdjieff, through the commentaries by Maurice Nicole, I realized immediately that I was faced with extraordinary teachings that had transformational power, that were immediately accessible and applicable, and in this moment of one's life could break through to a new quality of consciousness, of being and understanding. I remember calling a friend after finishing the first book and saying my life would never be the same, and that is exactly what happened. During that period, I came across an esoteric school that taught these ideas, and I gave up everything, my plans, my possessions, to join that school in order to learn more about these ideas, these teachings, to apply them, to live them. This went on for 4 years or so, and much was learned, certainly. Great effort was made. It seems that great effort is a central ingredient to immersion into these ideas, to entering a way of real transformation, leaving what is familiar and opening oneself entirely to the new. This was an extraordinary time. However, as with all things human, whether religious, esoteric, or otherwise, there were plenty of errors to be found in the midst of these extraordinary and pure ideas. The human factor. Eventually, I felt I had to leave the school and go back into the world. Out of this somewhat monastic setting, it was very difficult to readapt to ordinary life. There had been something exceptional about being pulled completely out of it, discovering essence, putting aside personality, living these ideas all the time, making great physical efforts. As with all spiritual matters, there are pitfalls to watch out for, to avoid, to inevitably fall into. One of them is the cult-like mentality that develops in a school created around these ideas. Another is taking the messenger for the message, which Gurdjieff constantly fought against. Another is making these ideas completely rigid, crystallizing them in one kind of understanding or level, and missing the direction that they point to, that Gurdjieff focused on, reducing them to a place and time rather to the timelessness that they come from. So the fourth way is presented now on the internet, because when I found it, it was long before that kind of a public exposure. One really had to dig for these teachings, and there was something healthy about that. Now that it is everywhere, all sorts of falsities are added to it, to the point of arch absurdity, which Gurdjieff predicted. For myself, the real power of these ideas truly came to the surface when I made the connection with what came out of the Gurdjieff Uspensky Nicole presentations and found the parallels in the teachings of the Christian mystics. Thomas Merton was especially significant as he expressed his almost inexpressible experience in deep prayer. And I recognized that those qualities of consciousness were precisely what the fourth way was pointing towards. No doubt the missing component, not fully presented in the fourth way as officially taught, is the idea of the holy. Gurdjieff was a man of prayer, did reference it, but he left that for each to discover as they thought for themselves, as they awakened through their own efforts, as they came face to face with that which can be found. Certainly in the way the school taught it, there was a profound lack of emotional quality in how these ideas were applied, and the way of the mystics, the lovers of God, the Meister Eckhart, the John of the Cross, Teresa of Avila, all added a critical component to the potency of these ideas. Because Gurdjieff presented it to a world that had turned its back on Christianity, there was something clinical, psychological, sterile in some ways about it, because it was one half of the process. The other half is the inflow of grace, the help from above. In the work it's called Higher Centers, again very clinical and sterile. But this is a reference to the impact of spirit. Then I came across the fact that Uspensky, at the end of his life, told his students, and it is found in his book and writing, abandon the system, and he counseled some of his leading students to go to Mount Athos in Greece and rediscover the tradition, the source of these ideas. Now, this was an extraordinary find, sort of a left turn in the midst of all these ideas. It was clear that Maurice Nicole had found the deeper esoteric Christian dimension, which he made known through his books The Mark and the New Man, and often referenced in the commentaries, but that has somehow been left out of mainstream fourth way teachings, even though the principles themselves turned and pointed to the origins in ancient mystical Orthodox Christianity. And then in an article I wrote for Gnosis magazine out of San Francisco, I made contact with Robin Amos, who ran Praxis Press Institute and passed away just a few years ago. And he revealed for me the very clear bridge between the teachings of the Holy Fathers out of the Philokalia, the instructions to the monks, the great tradition unknown to the West, and that completely opened the fourth way into its event horizon, if you will, its connection with ultimate teachings, taking it out of a sort of esoteric sect and self-focused methodology to life in the spirit awakening to God, communion with the holy, and all that is profoundly holistic and utterly transformative. What the ancient tradition calls theosis, divinization, God realization. At that time, I began studying the extraordinary writings of the ancients. Once again, synchronicity came into play, and I was introduced to a bookstore full of recent translations by people like Father Seraphim Rose, and that not only showed the parallels but made those critical missing connections. And so self-observation went from the personal psychological effort of consciousness and attention to the watch of the heart, and all of the teachings rooted in a consciousness of God found in that tradition that goes back to the origins of Christianity. Books like The Ladder of Divine Ascent, teachers like Saint Theophan the Recluse, Saint Seraphim of Sarov, Saint Simeon the New Theologian, these revelations of what Christianity really was, which is profound mystical transformation, literally cut off from the West, found only in a few individual mystics. This then placed the fourth way into its true home, in which it is fully absorbed and integrated into that ultimate revelation to humanity on the path of Christ. This, of course, is rejected by rigid Kardeckians who aggressively dislike anything related to Christianity and are attracted to the more exotic Sufi-like and secret brotherhood stories that Gurdjieff regaled Western intelligentsia with in the 20s. However, they are missing the mark because the connections are very clear. The beauty of the fourth way is that it is indeed meant to be lived in life, not in a monastery, not in an ashram, not through extreme physical self-transcendence. And it is eminently applicable to 21st century people who must live in the world, in their culture, and yet have tools to use the very things that are obstacles to the spiritual life as fodder, as fuel for their inner work and profound integration into their authentic selves and spiritual reality. Along the way, I had help, of course, especially with my mentor, Dr. Charles Ashenin, a Serbian Orthodox mystic, who himself was a bit of a black sheep, if you will, in that he was open to the wider world while being deeply rooted in his tradition. This further introduced me into Orthodoxy, not on its external side, but in its inner power of taking us from the old person to the new person, revealing what the scriptures mean in reference to wake, do not sleep, or awake, O sleeper, arise from the dead. Not I, but Christ lives in me. All of these cosmic sayings, if you will, now connected to a pathway, a way of living, real guidance from illumined teachers. This then is the bigger picture of the fourth way that makes it so much more than yet another teaching, but an accessible, practical, applicable approach to that ultimate teaching given to humanity.